Okay, welcome back, and it's time to take the page objects that we've already created and upgrade them a little bit. We're going to make them even better, more readable, more convenient, more reuse of code. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. What I'm going to do is, as we move forward, I'm going to explain to you sort of the reasoning behind why we're doing all this. Okay, this is not just a do as I do. There are good reasons for abstracting things in the way that we're about to. Right off the bat, one of the ways is, if you recall back to the last tutorial, we created a page object which had a bunch of different methods, right? Type into input, and that kind of mapped over to this input here. Get the input text, that would again grab the text from the input, then click button 1, which consequently clicks button 1, right? Well and good. The only problem is, as pages grow in size, right? If we wanted to maybe test all of this or manipulate all of this, right, in a single go, well, this code would start to get kind of big, right? I would have to write a method for every single thing, and there would probably be a lot of duplicated code, right? So if I have 2 elements or 3, I have 2 on this page. 2 inputs, not elements. They are elements, but they are input elements. If I have 2 inputs on this page, well, that necessitates 2 of these get input text methods, right? I would have to write one for the first input, one for the second input. I mean, I could write one and then pass in something, but then we're just getting into dirty territory. We don't want to do that. So how can I make this better, right? This is readable. This is nice, right? So over here you see, oh, well, training page, type in input, text from input equals training page dot get input text. Yeah, that's pretty good. We can do better, and I'm going to show you how. So the way we do better is we abstract the element out into its own class that describes a web element, and we're going to wrap some functionality around it to make it much cooler, much more useful, and it's just going to make things so much better. I'm just going to go ahead and show you, and hopefully it becomes self-evident as we go along. So how do we do that? Well, first let's go ahead and create what I'm going to call, if you remember in the, it would have been the page object tutorial, the last tutorial, we discussed the documentation for Python and Selenium and how they had an example. They had some good example documentation. But one of the things I sort of had a minor quibble with was their base element implementation. They had something called a class called base element, which they were overriding the magic methods of get and set, if you remember that. And I disagreed with that because I found it restrictive and I didn't think it worked in really anything other than an input, right? So how do we get around that? The answer is, well, I'll show you my implementation of a base element. And that does not mean that this is the right or best practice. This is just, I think, a good practice in most use cases. I just want you to get in the habit of thinking, right? Think about the long term of what you're going to do. Every decision we make in terms of how we build this should serve the long term. It should make sure that it's maintainable by not only ourselves but other people, which again means it should be readable, and it should make our lives easier. It should be fun. If we come in every day and automating is fast and enjoyable, we're doing the right thing. If we come in and we're constantly having to remember what we have to pass in and how to use it, that's a problem. Okay, so it needs to be intuitive. We don't want to build too much architecture in here. So I'll try to make this as basic as possible and show you why it's valuable. Class base element. Okay, so all we're doing here with this base element is we're wrapping a Selenium web element, and then we're letting it do some fancier things. So in order to build it, we need to have everything that we would normally need to build a Selenium web element, which is just a driver and a locator, right? So we're going to accept a driver, and I said we're going to accept a locator. This term can get a little nebulous. So I'm going to split up the term locator and by. And the reason will become clear in just a minute. Some people call the locator the combination of a path and a by. I find it more useful in our case to call the locator the actual string that describes that element path, and then the by is going to be something like the XPath and CSS selector and things like that. So we know we need that. Let's go ahead and add them as class attributes. Okay, we're going to assign locator, and we're going to assign the by. It's actually good to keep these in the class attribute because we're going to be using them multiple times, right? So it's nice to just have them here as a class attribute as opposed to passing them in to every method that needs them. That would be annoying, and that would make our job less fun, and we want to make our job more fun, right? So this looks pretty good. This gives us everything we need. The next big important piece would be the web element. This is going to hold the actual Selenium implementation, the Selenium web element class that we get when we find that element. In case we want to manipulate it directly, although ideally we wouldn't, we would manipulate it through the methods we build here. But also, we're going to need it as we're going to be manipulating it, right? So for now, I'm not going to add anything because we have to find it first, right? So that being said, why don't we write something to find it, right? This logic doesn't really change in practice. Well, in theory. It changes in practice in a little way, and I'll show you that. Here's why. So here's the unsophisticated way of doing this. The way we have been for a long time, right? And here we run into a problem. Well, what is it? Do I find the element by ID, by XPath, by a CSS selector? Do I need to run like a bunch of if statements, like, you know, look at this by and see what it is? No, you don't. So it turns out that when, let me see if I can pull this here. So again, pulling up the useful documentation. I'm going to import it just so I can use my IDE to kind of jump into this and show you what it really is. So if we import by, which is what we're going to use, what does that really mean, right, when we use a by? Well, as far as Selenium is concerned, it's literally just a class, a straight Python class. It's inheriting from objects. There's nothing special about this. And it's just holding basically what you'd call in Java or some of the other languages as finals or constants, right? These are just holding, well, ID, XPath, link, nothing special here at all, okay? So as you move forward and consider what by is, you're going to see a lot of by XPath and by CSS selector. It's just kind of mapping it to a string that Selenium understands. That's all that is. So let's forget that. Let's dispel that magic right now. All it is just some constants, right? Now, the thing I was mentioning here, what we've been doing is find element by CSS selector, right? Now, what is this really doing? So let's jump in here. Well, it turns out that all those things we've been typing, so find element by CSS selector, find element by, we did XPath, here we go, find elements by XPath, that's all, it's all here. All the stuff we've been using, this is where it's written, this is the code for it. And what is it actually doing under the hood? Well, you pass in the XPath, and it just calls a method called find elements. Well, in our case, we've been using find element, right? Find element by XPath, find element by this one here. We weren't using the plural is what I'm getting at. So it calls find element. So what do we need to pass in order to do this? Well, previously it was being handled by these methods, like find element by XPath. It was sort of doing it for us, and all it was doing was it was taking the XPath, like the locator you sent it, or you passed in rather, and it would pass it in as the value. Excuse me. Pass it in as the value, and then it would populate for you the by with this constant that we just saw, right? It's just a constant. That's all. So it populates these two things for us. The reason I'm going through all this with you is that this is an awesome way to do things because it allows us to make this decision on what we're using to find the element later, right? I don't have to encode a bunch of things. Well, you always have to use XPath or you always have to use CSS selector because that's how we, everything uses the find element by CSS selector. Well, that's ridiculous, right? We don't have to make the decision today. We can say, find the element, you provide me a by, and you provide me a value, and I will go and find your element. End of story, okay? So this is the method that I would recommend using. Unfortunately, this is the unsophisticated method, as I mentioned. So I would say, okay, let's go find the element, right? And we've already got, let's see, the value. This takes a value and a by, right? We've already got the value in we've already got the value in the locator right here, and the by is going to be our by. We don't know what it is right now, and we don't care. Whatever you give me later on when you choose what the by is, maybe you want to use XPath today, maybe you want to change it to CSS selector. This code never changes. As long as you give me the by and you give me the correct path, we're good to go. So I say this is the unsophisticated method because, well, this is still fragile. All right, so if I write this and this page takes a while to load, then this breaks and we're going to assume that the product has a problem. But no, the product doesn't have a problem. Our automation has a problem. It's brittle, it's weak. So how do we avoid that? Well, we described this as part of the Selenium utility belt tutorial, which is why we're back here. And the reason is the whole point of abstracting, right? And by abstracting, I mean we're writing a class for a base element, right? We're starting to get into some architecture here. Why? Right? Why make things difficult for ourselves? And the rule of thumb is any abstraction that you make in your code, right, in your automation, needs to be so valuable that the effort it takes you to teach it to someone, the effort it takes you to learn how to use it, to teach other people to use it every day, it needs to be worth that effort because it's so valuable, right? If it doesn't bring much value, then you're just making life harder on yourself and everyone else, and you're making their job suck. So don't do that. Now, the way we're going to make this valuable is we're going to use this as a mechanism for reducing brittleness, right? For making it stronger. And we're going to do that with an explicit wait, right? This is really the bread and butter of front-end automators, right? So unfortunately, this is very nice and well and good, and I wanted you to understand how you should be finding elements, which is accept a by and accept a value and make the decision about that later. Don't hard code find element by CSS, find element by XPath and all that. That's good knowledge to have, but today it doesn't matter because that's the unsophisticated way. We want the sophisticated way. The sophisticated way is to use the explicit wait, as we mentioned in the tool belt, the Selenium tool belt tutorial. The WebDriver wait class right here, again, will yield. Yield is a reserved word in Python. It will return an element as long as it finds it. If it doesn't find it, it throws an exception. So that's pretty handy, and I'll explain why it's handy. Instead of doing something like this, right, to handle slow stuff, we just say, hey, every time that you look for this element, I don't have to type this every single time, this explicit wait. We're going to do it one time. Every time you find any element, because again, we're going to use this base element for everything. We're going to use it for inputs. We're going to use it for buttons. We're going to use it for, hell, text. So anytime that I ask it to go and find an element, we get an explicit wait for free. Now remember, that wait is probably no time at all because it's polling. It's checking once every, well, the default of the poll frequency is 0.5 seconds. That's half a second. So a minimum of a half second wait, right, if it's not there right away. And then we're going to get it. And we get that for free every single time, and we can just forget about it once we've written it. So let's do that. Let's write it and let's forget about it. So we're going to need it up here. Okay, we're going to import WebDriver wait, and we're going to go ahead and implement it. We have a great example right here. Why not just steal it, right? So this one, what does this use? This uses a lambda. That is not what I'm going to use. I'm just going to take, let's just take this bit right here. We don't need to get into fancy lambda stuff today. So the element, if we find it, is called element. And we're going to pass in the driver, which, hey, we have access to already. We assigned it to a class attribute. We're going to say 10 is a good timeout, I think, just for today. This is going to depend on your case. So again, feel free to customize, right? This is your project, your beast, your automation. And we're going to wait until, and sorry, my font is kind of big so that you can see this clearly. So this forces me to kind of be clean with my syntax here. So, okay, WebDriver wait. This isn't very readable. We'll stick with this for now. So we pass in the driver, 10 seconds. We're waiting until what? We've talked about this in the toolkit tutorial. We're using expected conditions, right? And in this case, what do we expect? Let's go take a peek really quickly at expected conditions, right? So just glancing through here, waiting for element located to be selected, element to be clickable. Boy, there's a lot of these. Which one seems the most useful? I'm going to say element located. Let's see. I'm going to say, looking down here at the visibility, because I want to make sure it's visible. Visibility of element located says an expectation for checking that an element is present on the DOM of a page and visible. That seems as good a condition to wait for as any that I can think of. So let's use it. And again, think about all these other conditions you can use for your cases, right? Okay, so with respect to conditions, we are actually just going to import our expected conditions. And we're going to do that as EC, expected conditions. So what are we going to wait for? The expected condition of visibility of element located. Okay, so go ahead and wait up to 10 seconds for the element to be located, and if it's if it is, then go ahead and assign it to element, and if it's not, it'll blow up anyway, and we don't care. So this requires something, right? Visibility of element located. What does it take? Well, it takes a locator. So let's go ahead and handle that. I'm going to knock this down to the next line so you can still see what's going on here. So we're waiting until the expected condition, visibility of element located. Let's give it what we need to give it. So what does it expect in the way of a locator? Right? Well, the locator I mentioned earlier, kind of there's some nebulous language here that eventually actually is getting us into trouble. The locator, as Selenium understands it, is the by paired with the value. So I guess I'm going to be forced to change my, just to be clear today, and again, different people use these words different ways, but you can't really go wrong using the Selenium documentation. So we'll go ahead and we'll change this to value. We'll play nicely with the nomenclature they're using, and that's on me. So I want this to be very clear. So when they say locator, you need to be thinking a tuple, basically. That's how they define it. So the locator would look something like this. It's a by and then the value, right? So whatever the by that we pass in, and the value. And I forgot to change this. Again, that is what happens when you do things on the fly. All right. So we are passing in, instead of locator, we're going to call the value and the by. The value is going to be the string, and the by, again, is that by object. And the two of them together make what? Well, in this parlance, they make a locator. So We have to build that. We say locator is, again, self.by, and self.value needs to be in this order, folks, okay? That will cause you problems if it's not. And we just go ahead and pass it in here. So again, wait up to 10 seconds for the visibility of whatever element you passed in, right? We created a locator out of it. We went ahead and passed that in. So I expect that to work. So out of the box, again, what this is doing, this is probably bending your brain a little bit, right? Because you've got, I know the feeling, it happened to me too. You've got, okay, we got a WebDriver wait, and then like we're calling that, and then we're chaining that with an until thing, which then has an expected condition in it. So you really have to just get used to this and memorize it, do it a couple times, because this is very important. We're telling the WebDriver to wait .until, and then something we expect, which in this case is the visibility of the element that we located, and we have to locate that, so we pass that in. Boy, that's about 3 rabbit hole layers in, but just stick with me. I promise it's powerful enough that it's worth going through this pain, and I will show you in just a second why. So, find the element. Well, let's go ahead and something equals find, and what do I want to do here? I want to return it. So, for the sake of simplicity today, this feels a little weird to me in terms of design, but that's okay. It'll be clear to you, and that's the most important thing. You can decide how you want to implement it later. What I'm going to do is, instead of returning anything, I'm not going to return anything, because I'm going to have this find go ahead and populate the web element. With what? Well, the element we just found, right? So what happens is here, what do we have? We have a base element that when we initialize it, it's going to basically just set everything up in terms of give us a driver, give us the locator in terms of the value in the by. And we have a find method which will populate that. But when am I ever going to instantiate this into an object and not want the element to be populated? Every use case I can think of, the answer is never. You would never want to do that. So until that use case pops up, let's go ahead and find as part of the initialization. So, and again, the reason I'm not just doing the find here and assigning it is because I want this WebDriver wait in here, and I want it to be readable. And if I ever want to change this, I can just do it here instead of all this mess. So that's why I wrote a method to do it, and I call the method here. Calling methods automatically as part of initialization, some people consider it bad practice, but again, this is our world. Is it valuable enough to do? I said the answer in this case is yes. So it should find itself already. That's pretty helpful. We never have to deal with Selenium again on that front. What else do we want it to do? That's not valuable enough, right? This is not worth the pain yet. What would be? Well, if a button could click itself, that would be worth the pain to me, I think. And if I could get the text from the button with no hassle, that would be pretty valuable for me too. So let's do that. Now, what we could do here is say, all right, well, we already have the web element, right? So click it. Well, that doesn't make, that's not valuable. This is not worth all this effort if we're just going to pass through and call the web element.click. Otherwise, we would just be using that instead of this method. So we're going to be elegant, right? We're going to think long term. We're going to think not brittle. We're going to think robust and strong. And how do we do that? Well, let's put a WebDriver wait in here. And what we're going to wait on is for an element to be clickable, right? That, I think, is one of the expected conditions. Let's go ahead and confirm. So if I look here, sure enough, there is a wait called element to be clickable. What do you know, right? So that sounds like a good thing to check for before you click anything, right? Again, we get this for free for every single element that we deal with from now into perpetuity. And that is a fantastic piece of functionality. It's a great, valuable piece of functionality to have. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, at least most of it. And we're going to use it down here too. So now we get into some Some code repetition here. And I don't like that, but for today, we're just going to do it for clarity and worry about abstraction later. So the element is going to wait again until what? Until the element to be clickable. Right? And what element? Well, locator that we just created. Now again, I'm repeating code, and that seems kind of stupid. So what I'm going to do, since again we see problems as they arise and then just resolve them, because I don't want to refactor this later, let's just go ahead and this is another example of when this should tell me I might be doing something a little bit less than efficiently. So why not just do that one time and then call it forevermore, right? So that we don't repeat ourselves. Self.by, self.value, okay. Now, get rid of this. No need to have it. Get rid of this, no need to have that. We're just going to pass in self dot locator. Right? This is how, as we move on, we iteratively kind of solve these problems, and we get used to these little indicators, these little warnings that tell us maybe we should do this more efficiently. So we wait for it to be clickable, and then what do we do? Well, let's click the damn thing, right? So element equals the element if it's there. We'll wait for 10 seconds for it, and then we'll click it. That's it. So I said we wanted one more thing, and that was I wanted to be able to get the text from the button, right, or any element that's there. How do we do that? Well, let's add that. And do I need to wait for the element here? No, because I've already found it, right? Part of the find that we initiated automatically, we already did the WebDriver wait. There's no need to throw another one in there. We've already got the web element, so let's just strip the text off of it. Does that make sense? So for now, we're going to do a very basic, just give me the text off of it, right? Now we could just say return that. It's a nice efficient one-line method, but we're probably going to be adding things onto this later. So just to be safe, I like to do something like this. That way, if I ever need to change anything, I can leave this here and then just change and add and remove things. Again, just a little Python preference. So what do we have? We have a base element that's starting to get more valuable, right? It's a long way from where I'd like it to be, but right now it'll find itself with a wait in there, an explicit wait, which we put in there implicitly, if your mind wasn't already pretzeled, right? Implicitly meaning it's under the hood. You can't see it when it happens, but we are waiting. Every click that you attempt, it's going to wait for it to be clickable, so you won't get things where it tries to click and maybe something else is in front of it for a couple milliseconds or even a couple seconds, and it blows up, and you think again that your product has a problem and there's a bug. But no, it's your automation's fault, and that's bad. So we'll give you 10 seconds, or whatever you choose for your automation, to go ahead and wait for that to be clickable, and then we'll click it. Again, this is saving us so much time down the road. And the text piece here. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. I know this is taking a bit of time. Very, very crucial concepts. Let's use it, right? Otherwise, why do we do all this work? And I'm going to show you how this value starts to manifest and why I think this is cool. And it is cool. Okay, so training page over here. No more of these methods, right? We don't want to have to keep writing these methods into infinity. So all of you go away. We already did all the groundwork, right? So what we need to do is think more about, in this class, right, in this page object, think less in verb and nouns like click this and get text from that, and think more in terms of properties now. Things, fields on the page, an input, a button, right? So for today, I only care about the button. So we have something called button 1. And what is button 1? Well, it's basically going to be a web element that we wrapped up, right? Because a web element already has a bunch of things it can do. So just give me that toy right out of the box and then let me play with it. So in order to do that, we have to pass it in. Okay, from base element, import base element. And let's see, return the base element, which takes what? 3 things. This should tell me. It takes a by, a driver, and a value. I can also see it down here. It takes by, driver, and value, just in case you forgot. So we have a driver already. Again, I'm going to do this in a readable way. Driver by, which is going to be what? Well, we actually, what is the locator for this button? Now, if you look at the documentation on the Selenium side, they'll mention that some people put the locators in another module. Unless you have very, 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 very big suites with a lot of pages, that may not be your favorite method. You may just want to keep your locators right here in the elements that, or in the methods that are holding them, right? So for today, that's what we're going to do. So what is that locator? Well, let's just go ahead and assign it here. Just like we did in the other one. What do we want to use? Well, I believe previously I used the ID on this one. I think we gave it a pretty good one. So down here, ID is B1. Yeah, super easy, right? So let's use ID. Why not? Now I do this, and it's mad because I don't have by. Can I be lazy and import this? Let's do it the right way. So I believe I have that over here, and it's not even used. So why don't we just pull that right out of there and put it right into here. Because this is a third party, it's not part of our suite, goes above it. That little Python style for you there. So we have the by now. The locator is going to consist of the ID, the by rather, and the value. What is the value going to be? Well, what is the ID, right? The ID in this case is B1. Okay, locator equals, it looks good, the by and the value. Let's go ahead and pass that in. Now, you see here, I could actually write this to accept just a locator, right? And just strip it out by myself later, which I may do that, but for today, for simplicity's sake, let's just call this, right? We're going to take the first index of the locator, which is the by, right? And for the value, we take the second index of the locator, which is the value. There you go. So that should give us a base element, and that should return it. So what does this look like in practice? Let's go to the test. All of this goes away. We will actually go there. That still stays the same, right? That doesn't change. But now we have button 1, right, that can do something. And what can it do? Well, it can click, and we can get the text from it. So let's click it and see what happens. Now notice I have this here because it's a method, right? I'm calling it. No Selenium here at all. So let's see if it works. Now remember, get your virtual environment up, otherwise you are going to have problems. Palm test. Now I apologize for the 2 lines here. I've got this long path. It's kind of necessary. All right, here we go. Okay, it worked. The alert came up. which means it clicked on the button, right? So pretty cool, right? Pretty readable. We go to the training page.button.click. That's a pretty good story. It's still not great. I don't like this here, right? This little having to call this. This looks too much like programming. It doesn't look enough like a test case. And that's me being nitpicky, but again, why are we here if not to be the best at what we do? So this is a nice little trick that I picked up from an automator I have a lot of respect for, and I love it, and I'm probably going to use it forever. So we are going to treat this as a property, right? And a property is essentially, it can be a method that you are treating like a variable almost. You can get it and set it, but you add a bunch of extra functionality inside here, but it still treats it like a variable, which allows you to do something like this. Right? Now, just to prove that I'm not crazy, let's try it. And there we are. It clicks, right? So that is, I mean, we're getting about as readable as we can get here, right? The training page, the button 1 on the training page, you click it. Now, I'm going to do something before I do that, because that pops up an alert, and I haven't done anything to handle the alert yet, which is fine. So we'll just do it before it clicks the alert. Let's try one more thing with this newfound toy we got, this button, right? So we can do one more thing. There's text on that button. So, well, what is that text? Looks like button 1 to me. So why not assert something? Why not make a little test? Let's say assert training page.button1.text equals button 1. And again, this is only going to work if my text here is a property. And it is because, again, it's just a piece. We can treat it like a variable. We can get it. We can set it, right? So that's a big thing. If I don't put that property there, this blows up. So assert that training page.button1.text equals button 1. This is a beautiful assertion. I love this here. This is what a good, maintainable, readable test case that I could show to non-technical people. This is what this looks like. Because then you could look right over here and say, oh, well, yeah, button 1 text appears to be button 1, so that seems like a good test to me. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the click. That's kind of outside of our scope for now. We already proved that works. Here's the test case. Go to the training page, assert that the button 1 text equals button 1. And if it immediately stops right there, okay, so it worked. Otherwise, it would have failed, right? And just to make this is something that has been bothering me. I have not been closing my browsers, right? As you can tell down here, if you watch any of these videos recently, they've been piling up. I didn't really find a good time to get into that, so let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to perform the assert and quit the browser, so you should see it pop up and then just immediately die because this test is really fast, which is what we want. We want fast tests. Boom, done. It's over. Just to show you one more time without all of these other windows we have up. So I will minimize this just so you can see what a nice, fast, readable, maintainable test case looks like. And the test is done. That's it. So that's going to be it for today. I think that's enough for you to take in. Just to recap, we created a base element, right? Now, we created a base element because as we build the page object, sorry to jump around here, this is the page object we built. It allows us, instead of writing a bunch of methods that then we have to remember the names of later, now we can reasonably assume that things are called button this, input that, right? Whatever we want to call them, we always get the same functionality every time because we're using a base element, right? And that means that I always know I can click it, I can get the text of it, I can find it, I can do all that. It's always consistent. I'm not writing a bunch of methods that I'm duplicating. That's great for code reuse. That's awesome. And the great part about this is If this doesn't do all the things you want it to do, like let's say that we have an input and we need to get an attribute off the input, right? Like the value attribute, because we type something in and we need to validate it. Well, it doesn't really make sense to tack that on to the base element because we don't really need to do that for base elements. Well, then inherit from this, right? Subclass base element into maybe a base input element or just an input element, whatever you want to do, and add on all the input stuff that you would want to see, right, to make your life happy and exciting and curious, right? And when you walk into your office, boom, just get a base element or get an input element, assert that the text is there, manipulate it, click it, move it. You never have to touch Selenium once you build this stuff. So this is where things start to get very exciting. You start doing stuff like this, you are ready to start adding value at on a team, on an automation team, or at an organization that needs front-end automation. This is the kind of stuff you need to have. You need to understand your weights, your explicit weights versus your time.sleeps, why you shouldn't be using time.sleeps. You need to understand when to abstract things like this and when not to, right? And again, the rule of thumb is the value has to be so valuable, so useful to write this that it's worth teaching someone else and explaining without getting embarrassed, right? That you had built this big, complex thing. And this is not very complex. It's a single class that gave us all this power. And look at how readable this page object is. Look at how readable this test case is. So I think this right here is sort of the gold standard for what we want to see for front-end testing. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you for sitting through it. And as we move forward, we're actually running out of videos on the basic browser automation course. I would say there's probably going to be one, maybe two more tutorials. And then we're going to be moving on into a different course called Intermediate Browser Automation, which is going to deal with frameworks and great stuff like that that's going to make you, again, automate at a professional level. So I will see you soon.